October 1914, Carpathian Mountains, Romania. 47 men marched into the Argus Pass on standing orders to hold a supply corridor against Austro-Hungarian advancement. By the end of that first week, 6 of them refused to leave their tents after sundown. By the end of the third week, the battalion commander filed a report so unusual that the War Ministry in Bucharest sealed it for 40 years. This is what happened during the 31 days the Dracula Battalion spent in those mountains before 11 survivors walked out of the pass on foot without their equipment, without their commanding officer, without explanation. Subscribe for more true historical horror stories. My name doesn't matter to anyone anymore. I'm 81 years old, and I live in Cluj in a room above my daughter's bakery. I served in the Romanian land forces beginning in September of 1914. Assigned to the 3rd Mountain Infantry out of Pesti, and I held the rank of Private Secondas when they marched us into the Argus Pass that autumn. I had been a mill worker before the mobilization. I knew how to keep my head down and do what I was told. They told us we would be resupplying forward positions for 6 weeks, maybe 8. The army was paying 18 lei per month, which was more than I had seen from the mill in any given 30 days. My mother had 3 younger siblings to feed. You understand why a man walks into a dark place when someone offers him money to do it. We arrived at base post 17 on the 12th of October. It was a cleared area halfway up the Argus Valley, maybe a quarter-kilometer across, ringed by black pines that went up the ridgelines on both sides until the rock took over and the trees gave out. There were 2 supply sheds built from fir planks, a command tent reinforced with canvas and rope, and a cook station that was nothing more than a fire pit with iron grates over it. The army had placed this post here because the pass narrowed to a single track about 3 km north, and someone in Bucharest had decided that track needed watching. Our commanding officer was Captain Lucian Danila, 43 years old, a career soldier who had served in the Second Bulan War and had the disposition of a man who had stopped expecting things to make sense. He was broad through the shoulders with a grey, streaked moustache and a habit of pulling at his left ear when he was thinking. He briefed us the first evening in flat, economical language. The pass was contested. Austro-Hungarian patrols had been active 20 kilometers to the north. We would rotate sentries in pairs every 3 hours through the night. We would not discharge weapons without his authorization. We would not leave the post perimeter unaccompanied for any reason. That last rule he repeated twice. He did not explain the second rule, and I did not ask. You learn quickly in the army that explanations are a luxury and questions are a form of insubordination. I noted the rule and filed it with the others. The first days were ordinary in the way that hard work is ordinary. We rotated supply runs down the valley track, interteened munitions, reinforced the shed walls against the coming winter. The altitude was around 1,200 m, and the temperature dropped fast after sundown, sometimes to -5 or 6 by midnight. We burned a lot of wood. We slept in 2-hour intervals. We ate black bread and bean soup and were grateful for it. Georgi Marin was the man I worked alongside most of those first days. He was from Bau, a former shepherd who had the mountain man's habit of watching the ridgel lines constantly, not anxiously, just habitually, the way a shepherd watches his animals. He didn't talk much. When he did talk, it was to point out practical things. The wind shifting, a change in cloud cover, the track conditions. I respected that in a man. Corporal Teodoro Hrib kept the unit log. He was a school teacher from Yashi, 30 years old, with round spectacles that were always fogging in the mountain cold, and he recorded everything in a small green-covered notebook he kept inside his coat against his chest. Incidents, weather, supply counts, anything the captain told him to note. Later, after everything, that notebook was what the War Ministry found. It was what they sealed. I have not seen it since 1952, when a government clerk confirmed it existed and then showed me the door. On the fourth day, October 16th, the horses became difficult. We had 4 animals at the post used for the supply runs, and by mid-morning all 4 were standing hard against the far edge of their picket line, facing away from the northern tree line, ears flat. They would not settle. The corporal wrote it down. Horses agitated northeast quadrant. Duration approximately 4 hours. The captain looked at the tree line for a while, said the altitude was affecting them, and returned to the command tent. I thought about wolves. The Carpathians had wolves, and everyone knew it. Georgi had told me the first day that wolves didn't usually come this close to a camp with 47 armed men and a fire burning. Wolves were smart. He said it the way he said most things, like a man offering a fact, not an opinion. I filed that away, too. By the 5th night, the sounds started. I was on second century rotation with a man named Petru Dinu, a former quarry worker from Campalong who had forearms like bridge cables. We took our post at the northeast edge of the camp perimeter, which put the dark tree line about 30 m in front of us. It was past midnight, maybe 1:00 in the morning, temperature well below freezing, no moon. The sound came from inside the treeline, not from a particular direction, just from inside the darkness, as if the darkness itself was producing it. It was low, below the wind, almost below hearing. Not an animal call. Not exactly. It had intervals to it, a rhythm that kept almost resolving into something recognizable and then not resolving. Petro turned his head to the side and listened, the way you do when you're trying to hear a whisper. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. We listened for about 4 minutes and then it stopped. We reported it to the captain at shift change. He asked if we had seen anything. We said no. He told Frim to log it. Unusual acoustic phenomenon, northeastern perimeter, approximately 1:15 hours. No visual confirmation. He went back to sleep. That was the right response. That was the professional response. I understood it. On the 7th day, October the 19th, Gorgi found the first tracks. He was checking the northern tree line for deadfall to split about 40 m into the pines when he came back to camp with the expression of a man recalibrating something. He brought the captain to the site. I went because Gorgi gestured for me to follow, and I had learned that Gorgi's gestures were worth following. The tracks were in a patch of soft ground near a seep spring that hadn't frozen yet. They were bipedal. That was clear enough from the stride pattern, but the print was not a boot print. It was longer than any boot I had seen, and the toe impressions were separated widely, almost splayed, and each toe ended in a distinct narrow depression that went deeper than the ball of the foot. The heel impression was shallow. The stride between prints was approximately 1 and 1/2 m, maybe more. Borgi was a tall man and his stride was barely a meter. The captain measured the prints with his field ruler. He recorded the dimensions in HRI's notebook. Length 38 cm, width across toes 19 cm, depth at ball 4 cm, depth at heel less than 1. He looked at Gorgi. Gorgi looked at the forest. The captain said, "Probably a bear walking upright briefly, as they sometimes do." He said it in the voice he used for things he had already decided not to think about too hard. Georgie said nothing. He looked at me. I looked at the print. The stride length was between tracks was consistent. Whatever left those prints had been walking, not bounding. It had been walking alongside the tree line parallel to our camp perimeter for at least 30 m before the ground hardened and the tracks became impossible to follow. It had been walking at night based on the frost development in the impressions. It had been watching us. Nobody slept especially well that night. I won't pretend otherwise. But nobody said anything either, because saying something out loud was the kind of thing that could get a man laughed at or worse, transferred to a worse posting. We were soldiers. We kept our mouths in order and our thoughts to ourselves. October 21st, 9 days into our posting, Petro Dinu found the goat. It wasn't our goat. It must have come down from a village settlement somewhere higher up the valley. It was in the treine about 20 m inside the pines, lying on its side. There was no blood on the ground. There was no wound that tore flesh or broke bone, but the animal was utterly dry. I don't know how else to describe it. The hide was intact. The eyes were open. But when Petru lifted it, the body had almost no weight. It was like lifting a skin stuffed with straw. The captain had right. One animal carcass recovered. Northeast quadrant. Cause of death unknown. He told Petru to leave the animal where it was. He said scavengers would deal with it. He told us all to get back to work. I want to be precise about what happened over the next 3 days, because precision is the only honest thing I have left to offer. On the night of October 22nd, the sounds returned, this time from 2 directions simultaneously, northeast and northwest, both at the same register, both with that same almost rhythm. They lasted 11 minutes by Cribb's watch. On the 23rd, Georgie found a second set of tracks, this time on the south perimeter. Same print profile, same stride length. Something had walked completely around our camp while we slept. On the 24th, Private Radu Vakaris, who had been the quietest man in the unit and had given no previous indication of any mental irregularity, reported at morning assembly that he had seen a face at the edge of the treine dew. Ring his sentry rotation the previous night. He said it had been pale, very pale, he said, pale enough to see clearly in the darkness. He said it had been tall, taller than the gap between the lowest pine boughs and the ground, which Fry later measured at 2 m and 10 cm. He said the eyes had caught the fire light from 50 m away, the way a cat's eyes catch light. He used that specific comparison. He was not a dramatic man. Nobody laughed. That was the thing that I remember most clearly about that morning. In a group of 47 men at any other time and in any other place, someone would have laughed. Nobody did. Captain Danila interviewed Vakaris for 20 minutes in the command tent. He came out alone. He told Harib to record the incident as a sentry report. Possible enemy scout. Description uncertain due to darkness and distance. He pulled at his left ear for a long moment. Then he doubled the night watch rotation from pairs to groups of 3 and moved the perimeter sentries from 30 m out to 15 m from the tree line. Or I should tell you what the local people knew. There was a village, Kali Barbar Noir, maybe 8 km south of our position. When our supply runs passed through, the older men and women would watch us from doorways without waving. On one occasion, a woman of perhaps 70 came to the road and spoke to our wagon driver, Ionessu, who was from the region and knew the local speech well. She told him that the pass had been closed in her mother's time and in her grandmother's time for the same reason. She told him what they called the things that lived in the mountains above the snow line. She used the old word, struggy. Aiku told me this on the return run. He told it the way you tell something you're not sure whether to believe, with a small shrug at the end. I asked him what the woman had advised. He said she told him we should leave before the first true freeze, before the ground went hard, because once the ground went hard in the pass, the things that came down from the peaks could move freely. She said it the way you say, close the window before the rain comes in. Matter of fact, practical. I thought about that for a long time. October 26th, 2 weeks in, the temperature had dropped sharply the night before down to -9, and the ground had crusted over with the first hard freeze of the season. I remember checking it with my boot heel in the morning and feeling the ground give nothing back. Hard as iron. I remember thinking of the old woman's words and then deliberately not thinking of them. The way you push away something you don't want to be true. That night, Private Vassal Konstantin, 32 years old, a former riverboatman from Galati, was found at his sentry post at approximately 3:40 hours. He was alive. He was sitting on the ground with his rifle across his knees, looking northeast, eyes open. But he did not respond when his name was called. His replacement, finding him unresponsive, brought the corporal and then the captain. They could not rouse him by voice or by touch. He was breathing steadily. His pulse was slow but present. His skin was cold to the touch, beyond what the temperature explained. On the left side of his neck, Corporal Herib found 2 small puncture marks. They were precisely spaced approximately 4 cm apart, slightly larger than a large nail would leave. There was almost no blood. Each wound had the edges pressed down rather than torn outward. Whatever had made them had pressed rather than cut. Him measured the wound placement and spacing and wrote it all down in the green notebook. And I know he wrote it because I watched him write it and I watched his hand shake while he did. Konstantin regained consciousness 11 hours later. He remembered his rotation beginning. He remembered the cold. He remembered the tree line. He did not remember anything after approximately 2:30 hours. He was not hysterical. He was quiet. He ate his evening ration and sat by the fire and didn't speak to anyone. He was transferred down valley by wagon the next morning on the captain's order, listed as ill with fever, and I do not know what became of him after that. The captain did not explain. He increased the rotation to groups of 4, with movement required. No stationary sentry allowed to stand still for more than 2 minutes consecutively. He requisitioned additional kerosene from the supply dump and ordered fires kept burning at all 4 compass points of the camp perimeter through the night. He wrote to battalion headquarters requesting reassignment of the post, citing tactical insufficiency of the current position. He used that phrase, tactical insufficiency. Prib showed me the draft. The response came 3 days later by courier. Request denied. Strategic necessity. Hold position. The captain read it twice, folded it carefully, and placed it inside his field kit. He did not share its contents with us directly. He didn't need to. When a captain reads a letter twice and folds it that carefully, every man in Camp U understands the answer was no. October 29th, 3 things happened in sequence that I have turned over in my memory for 67 years, trying to arrange them into something logical, and I have never managed it. At dusk, around 17:30 hours, all 4 horses tore free of the picket line simultaneously and ran south down the valley track at a full gallop. We never recovered them. At 2000 hours, the Northwest fire, which Corporal Shree had personally fueled an hour before, went out without explanation. There was no wind. The other 3 fires burned without disruption. At 21:30, Private Florin Badescu, a former carpenter from Piest, reported from the northwest sentry position that something large had stepped from the Triine into the edge of firelight range. Badescu was a phlegmatic man. He had been in the army 3 years and had seen action at Tutrahan in the Balkan War. When he reported in the sequence a soldier is trained to report: location, time, duration, description. He said the figure had stood at the edge of the darkness for approximately 40 seconds. He said it was tall, well over 2 m. He said its posture was upright, but with the shoulders carried slightly forward, not the posture of a man. He said it had looked directly at the sentry position. He said it had not moved in any animal way. No shifting of weight, no sniffing, no circling. It had simply stood and looked and then stepped back into the dark. He said one more thing which Herod recorded verbatim in the notebook. He said, "It was not curious about us. It already knew everything it needed to know about us. I have thought about those words for 67 years. I cannot improve on them." November 1st, All Saints' Day, which is not an insignificant calendar coincidence in Romania, though I will make no specific claim about that. The temperature was -14. The sky was clear, and the moon was 3/4 full, which gave more light than we had seen in weeks. That light turned out to be a problem. At approximately 2200 hours on the clear moonlit night of November 1st, the sentries on the east and north positions simultaneously reported movement in the tree lines on both sides. Not the same figure, both reports confirmed multiple shapes moving between the trunks at the Triine edge, unhurried, parallel to the camp perimeter. How many? The North Sentry group said 3, possibly 4. The East group said at least 2. They were moving in the same direction northward, which meant they were moving in coordinated parallel paths around the camp. The captain ordered everyone not on sentry duty to arm and stand by inside the camp center. He ordered the perimeter fires built up immediately. 43 men stood in the camp, clearing in -14 degrees holding rifles, while the things in the forest moved around them in the moonlight. We stood there for an hour and 40 minutes. Nobody spoke above a murmur. Then the sounds started all at once from multiple directions, overlapping but distinct, each with its own slightly different pitch. Not howls, not growls. Lower than that, longer than that, with the same almost linguistic rhythm we had heard before, but now with harmonics, different registers, overlapping as if they were communicating, as if we were not the intended audience for the communication, but simply the subject of it. That is the most disturbing interpretation I have reached, and it is the one I believe is accurate. The harmonics went on for 6 minutes, then silence. Then the movement in the Triine stopped by 0100 hours. Everything was quiet. Prib counted the entities by sentry reports. Minimum 5 separate shapes confirmed across all positions. Maximum estimated 9. He wrote it all down. He also wrote down at the bottom of that entry 3 words that he underlined twice. They counted us. I want to be clear about what did not happen because the distinction matters. Nobody was killed. Nobody was taken. The entities did not enter the camp. They watched, they moved, they communicated, and they withdrew. That deliberateness was the most frightening element of the entire experience. More frightening than any charge or direct attack would have been because it communicated something specific. We were being assessed. We were being considered. The decision about what to do with us had not yet been made. November 3rd, the first direct approach. I was on duty northwest perimeter in a group of 4. Temperature -11. No moon, overcast. Firelight was our only illumination, and the fires pushed the darkness back maybe 15 m. At 50 hours, something walked out of the pine trees. It walked slowly. That detail is important. It walked the way a man walks when he is crossing a room he knows well. Not predatory, not cautious, simply deliberate. It came out from between two pines and stood at the treine edge, and it was in the firelight range snorts now, partial firelight at 15 m, and I can tell you what I saw. I saw height. Whatever the figure was, it stood 212 m tall at minimum, maybe mo. Ray, the proportions were not entirely wrong, but they were not entirely right either. The limbs were too long. The torso was narrow, but the shoulders were wide in a way that didn't distribute weight the way a man's shoulders do. The color of the skin or hide in the firelight was almost white. Not the white of a sick man, the white of a birch tree, of something that has never needed camouflage because it has never needed to hide. And the eyes, I will describe the eyes, because it is the one detail that has never faded in 67 years of trying to let it fade. The eyes caught the firelight from 15 m away and held it. Not a reflection like an animal's eyes shine, greenish or orange. These held the light and gave it back cold, pale amber, the color of old bone. They were set wide in the face. They did not blink during the 30 seconds we stood looking at each other. I did not fire. Corporal Badescu, who was senior in our group, had his rifle raised but did not fire. We had standing orders requiring authorization. We also had the instinct, unanimous and unspoken, that firing would be a mistake. Not because we feared the thing, because we feared what would happen after the thing was fired upon. There is a difference. The figure stood for 30 seconds, maybe a few more. Then it stepped backward, unhurried, one step at a time, back into the trees, and the firelight let it go 1 meter at a time until there was nothing but pine forest and darkness. We reported immediately. Hib reported it. The captain came to the northwest perimeter and stood looking at the treine for a long time. He pulled at his left ear. He said nothing for 4 minutes. Then he returned to the command tent. November 5th, the captain filed another request for reassignment. He described the situation in careful, bureaucratic language. Unknown entities observed. Horses lost. One soldier temporarily incapacitated. Cause unknown. Unexplained tracks and vocalizations. Century reports of bipedal entities of unusual dimensions. Repeated perimeter surveillance, behavior indicating organized activity. He did not use any words that would have caused the ministry to categorize his letter as the product of a disordered mind. He was precise and controlled, and I believe he spent a long time choosing every word. We waited 5 days for the response. 5 more days in that camp with the things in the forest. The response, when it came, said the same thing as the first. Hold position. I watched the captain read it. He was very still for a long time. Then he said to nobody in particular, "We will give it 2 more weeks." He said it the way a man says something to himself that he has already decided. Cribb noted the date and time of that statement in the log. November 7 through 12th was a period of intensification that I will describe as accurately as I can. The visits became nightly, never the same location twice in sequence, east, then south, then northwest, then east again. Always between 2200 and 300 hours. Always 1 or 2 figures standing at the treine in the firelight. Never closer, never less deliberate. Cribb's log from this period describes each visit in the same dry notation. Entity observed position, duration, behavior, withdrawal. He was doing what a trained military observer does. He was keeping his mind ordered. On November 9th, the figure at the south position was accompanied by a smaller one. Not small, shorter, still well over 2 m, but proportioned differently with the same pal and the same manner of standing. The South Century group was led by a man named Serbu, a former wrestler from Brela, a genuinely large man, and he later described the shorter figure as a child. He used that word and then immediately said, "No, not a child." But the proportions suggested something younger than the first ones we had seen, something that had not yet reached its full dimensions. That detail ran through the camp faster than any order. November 13th. 7 of the 46 remaining men refused sentry duty after sundown. The captain could have had them disciplined. Under normal conditions, refusal of duty in a wartime posting was a serious offense. He looked at them for a long time. He told them to take interior duties. Georgi told me later that night, while we were on rotation, that the captain had told him privately he would not punish men for being rational. I thought that was a significant thing for a career military officer to say. The animals had begun avoiding the camp entirely by this point. Not just the horses, which were gone. The birds that had been present in the pines, common enough in the first weeks, a few thrushes and nutcrackers moving through, had been absent for days. The forest around us had gone quiet in a way that was distinct from normal autumn quiet. It was the quiet of a landscape that has organized itself around a hierarchy we were not at the top of. November 14th was the night the figure entered the camp. I was not on sentry duty. I was in the East Supply D with 9 other men on rest rotation. At 2:15, I woke to a silence different from normal silence. Not quiet absence. I have spent years trying to explain the difference. The wind was present. The fire outside was crackling. But underneath those sounds, there was a new silence, as if something very large was standing still, very nearby, and using the nearness of a very large stillness to press against everything else. I heard Gorgie, who was near the shed door, say softly, "Don't move." Not a whisper, a breath with shape. Nobody moved. Through the gap between the shed planks where the wood had walked in the cold, I could see the central camp clearing in the moonlight, and I could see the figure. It was inside the camp perimeter, standing near the dead fire in the center of the clearing, perhaps 12 m from where I lay. It was not moving. It was standing with its back partly toward the shed, facing the command tent. The pale amber eyes were not visible from this angle. The pale skin caught the moonlight and reflected it with no warmth. The arms hung at its sides, but the hands were low below where human hands hang, and the fingers were long. It stood this way for, I believe, 4 minutes. Snorts Georgi counted under his breath. I know because I could feel his breath moving close to my ear, and I could hear the count. Then it turned its head, not its body, only its head, and it looked directly at the supply shed where we were lying. It looked directly at us. The eyes caught the moonlight. It knew we were there. It had known the entire time. It was showing us that it knew. It turned its head back. It took 4 long steps toward the north perimeter. Each step covered enormous ground, and it walked through the camp boundary and into the pine trees, and the forest took it. Total time inside the perimeter, approximately 4 to 5 minutes. The figure had not touched anything, had not damaged anything, had not threatened any person directly. It had come inside our walls and looked at us and left. That was all it needed to do. That was the message. And every one of the 46 men in that camp understood it by morning, even those who had not witnessed it directly. Captain Danila called assembly at 70. He stood in front of 46 men in the frozen morning, and he was straight-backed, and his uniform was correct, and his expression was what I can only describe as professionally resolved. He said, "Last night an entity of unknown origin entered this camp, observed our positions, and withdrew." He said it the way a man reads a weather report. He then said, "I am declaring a tactical withdrawal from base post 17, effective immediately." He did not explain the withdrawal to headquarters in those terms. Prib showed me the report draft position untenable due to hostile indigenous activity and inadequate support resources. Recommend permanent closure and rerouting of supply corridor. It was a true account of the situation that contained none of the truth of the situation. The army has always been skilled at that particular form of accuracy. We broke camp in 3 hours. There was very little debate about pace. Men who had been slow and deliberate all month suddenly moved with the focused efficiency of people who have made a collective decision. Equipment was loaded onto the 2 remaining supply sledges. The tents were folded. The cook station was dismantled. The fires were extinguished, all 4 perimeter fires. And that extinguishing felt like the crossing of some threshold, like closing a door that you know you are not going to open again. November 15th, 9:30 hours. 46 men and 2 sledges began moving south down the valley track. The pine trees were close on both sides for the first 3 kilometers before the valley opened. Nobody spoke much. Gorgie walked beside me and looked at the trees on both sides the whole time, steadily, without alarm, in the way of a shepherd watching his flock. He never said what he saw or didn't see in those trees. When I asked him once years later in a letter, he wrote back 3 words: "We weren't followed." We reached Kali Bababanoa at 16:40 hours. 7 hours of walking with the sledges 8 km. The village elder met us at the road. He looked at our numbers. He counted. He said something to translated for the captain. He says 46 came out of the pass, and he says 46 should thank whatever they offered for safe passage. The captain said he had offered nothing. The old man looked at him for a long moment and then went back inside without further comment. We dispersed from Kali Baba Noah over the following 2 days. The unit was formally reassigned. Battalion headquarters recorded the withdrawal as completed per tactical reassessment. Base post 17 was marked as decommissioned due to structural inadequacy and resupply inefficiency. A new supply corridor was routed 15 kilometers west, well clear of the Arges Pass. It has, to my knowledge, remained well clear of the pass ever since. I went back to the mill in Pesti. I worked there or 30 more years. I married. I raised 2 daughters. I did not speak of the Argus Pass to my wife, not ever, though she knew something had happened to me in the army. The way wives know things that husbands don't say. She died in 1971. After that, I moved to Cluj with my younger daughter, and I have been here since. I looked for Gorgie Marin after the war. I found him in 1923. He was shepherding again in the southern Carpathians, well south of the Argus region. He confirmed everything I remembered. He also told me something he had not mentioned at the time, which he said he had not mentioned because it would not have helped anyone. He said that on the night the figure entered the camp, when he was watching through the shed planks, he saw the figure pause near the command tent and look at the tent for a long time before it left. He said the tent wall was thin canvas. He said the figure would have known the captain was inside. He said he'd looked at the tent for a long time and then chose to leave. Georgi died in 1947. Frib the corporal was killed in the Second World War. Petro Dinu, the quarry worker, immigrated to America in the 1920s, and I lost track of him. Of the 46 men who walked out of base post 17 on November 15, 1914, I am the last one I can account for. I am 81 years old, and I have thought about what I saw more days than not for 67 years. Young people, when they hear old men tell this kind of story, tend to assume the distance softens the truth, that memory works like translation, losing something each generation. They assume we fill in the gaps with what we need to believe. That's a reasonable assumption. It's also wrong. The thing about genuine terror is that it doesn't fade. The ordinary days of your life fade. The thing in the clearing stays exactly where it was. They have a name for them in the old folklore. The beings that walk those mountains above the snow line. Strege is the common word, the one the woman in the village used. But the older records, the monastery records from Mulavia and the landowner accounts from the 17th century, use a different term for the large ones, the ancient ones, the ones that have territory in the high passes. Moray Diont Mountain, more different from the village. Legends the stories about dead neighbours, and open grave. These are older, these predate the villages. The accounts go back to the 14th century, maybe further coordinated behaviour territorial, not predatory toward humans. Unless provoked, or unless humans violate their boundaries, patient every generation, or so someone pushes too far into the Arges Pass, and the old records update with a new entry. The Army in 1914, a geological survey team in 1931 who left their equipment and didn't explain what they were surveying for in the first place. A group of hikers in 1963 who reported unusual experiences and were quietly advised by regional authorities not to file written accounts. The mountain is still there. The pass is still there. What is in the past is still there. I know this because I know what it is and what it has always been. I only know what I saw with my own eyes in October and November of 1914. And what I saw was this. Something that was old before Romania was Romania. Old before the mountains had names. Standing in the moonlight in our camp and looking at us with patient amber eyes and deciding to let us go. We left because a career soldier who had survived 2 wars decided the tactical withdrawal was the correct response to an enemy that could not be engaged by any means available to him. He was right. We left. The more I stayed. That is how the arrangement works and has always worked going back to the 14th century and probably further than that. The mountains will outlast all of us. Everything in them outlasts all of us. The forest always wins.